I felt the weight of the envelope before I ever opened it. It had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days, the return address stamped in my grandmother's careful handwriting, the ink slightly smudged the way it always was when she wrote in a hurry. I knew what was inside. I had always known, in the quiet way you know things that nobody ever says out loud in your family. I just wasn't ready for everyone else to know it too. My grandmother passed on a Tuesday in late October, the kind of day where the sky can't decide between gray and blue and settles for both. She was 79 years old, sharp as a tack until the very last week, and she had spent the better part of her final decade making sure that what she built would go to the right person. She told me once, sitting at her kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, that she had watched her own mother's estate get torn apart by relatives who showed up at the funeral with lawyers and left with furniture that didn't belong to them. She said she would not let that happen to hers. I was 28 when she died. I had been living 40 minutes away, in a small apartment I could barely afford on a teacher's salary, driving out to see her every other Sunday with groceries and whatever audiobook she'd requested that week. My cousin, my mother's sister's son, 2 years older than me, the kind of man who sends emails with "per my last message" at the beginning, had visited her exactly twice in 4 years, both times around the holidays, both times with his wife, who called my grandmother so cute in the voice people use for toddlers and golden retrievers. His name was Derek. His wife's name was Cassandra. And the moment the will was read, they became the most dangerous people in my life. My grandmother's house was a 4-bedroom craftsman on a corner lot in a neighborhood that had quietly become valuable without anyone quite noticing. She had paid it off in 1987. By the time she passed, it was worth more than most people in our family had ever seen in one number. She also had a savings account, some bonds, and a storage unit full of furniture and jewelry, and things she had collected across 79 years of a life that was, by every measure, well lived. The will was read at her attorney's office, a quiet man named Mr. Holt, who wore the same style of wire-rimmed glasses he'd probably worn for 30 years. Present were me, my mother, my aunt, Derek's mother, Derek himself, Cassandra, and Derek's younger sister, my cousin Priya, who drove 4 hours to be there and sat beside me the entire time with her hand on my knee. Mr. Holt read the document in a steady, unhurried voice. My grandmother left her car to my mother. She left her jewelry collection, piece by piece, to specific people she had named individually. Nothing left to chance. She left the savings and the bonds, split into smaller portions, distributed among 4 different relatives, including me, and she left the house to me, entirely, in my name, with a note that Mr. Holt read aloud in that same steady voice. She knows what to do with it. She always did. I heard Cassandra exhale sharply to my right. I heard my aunt shift in her chair. I looked straight at Mr. Chair. I looked straight at Mr. Chair. Holt and I did not let my face move. I had known. My grandmother had told me 2 years earlier, sitting at that kitchen table, in the direct and unsentimental way she had of saying important things. She had said, "I'm leaving you the house. Don't let them make you feel guilty about it. You earned it by showing up." I had nodded. I had not told anyone, and I had spent 2 years quietly, carefully, doing exactly what she asked of me. Learning about property law, consulting with Mr. Holt myself, understanding what I would need to do when the time came. The time had come. The first call came before I had even made it back to my car. My aunt's name lit up my phone and I let it ring. Then Derek's name, then my aunt again. I drove home with Priya beside me, both of us quiet for most of the 40 minutes, until she said, "You knew, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. I said yes. She nodded once and looked out the window. "Good," she said. "You should have known. You were the only one who showed up." By the time I got home, I had 7 missed calls and 4 text messages. I read them all without responding. My aunt's texts were sad at first, confused, she said, hurt. And then, by the 4th one, they were something else. Derek had a family to think about. Derek had been planning. Did I know what that house could sell for? Did I understand what this would mean for everyone if I was just going to sit on it? My grandmother couldn't have understood the market when she made this decision. Surely we could talk about this like adults. I set my phone face down on the counter. I made tea. I sat at my own kitchen table. And I thought about my grandmother's hands wrapped around her mug, and I heard her voice saying, "Don't let them make you feel guilty about it." I went to bed without responding to anyone. The pressure didn't build slowly. It arrived all at once, the way a storm does when you've been watching the sky and convincing yourself it will pass to the north. My aunt called my mother. My mother, to her credit, told my aunt that this was between me and the estate and that she should speak to me directly. My aunt told my mother that I was being selfish. My mother told my aunt that she was welcome to take that opinion and keep it to herself. I heard all of this secondhand from my mother, who delivered it with the particular exhausted dignity of a woman who has been managing her sister's emotions for 50 years and is very, very tired. Derek requested a meeting. He called it a family conversation. He said he just wanted to understand the situation. He said the word fair 4 times in a 90-second voicemail, and each time he said it, what he meant was fair to me. I agreed to meet him. I want to be honest about that. I didn't have to, and part of me wishes I hadn't, but I agreed because I still believed at that point that it was possible to be reasonable with someone who is not being reasonable. I have since updated that belief. We met at a coffee shop near his office, neutral ground, which was his suggestion. He arrived 7 minutes late, which I noticed. He ordered an expensive drink and did not offer to pay for mine, which I also noticed. He sat down across from me and he smiled the smile of someone who has decided this conversation is already going his way. He said my grandmother hadn't understood what she was doing. I let him finish. He said the market had changed dramatically, and a single person living alone in a house that size was wasteful. I let him finish. He said that the family, and he used that word the way people use it when they mean themselves, had certain expectations, and that my grandmother, God rest her, had perhaps not been in the best mental state toward the end. I let him finish. Then I said, "Mr. Bader, Holt has documentation of my grandmother's cognitive assessments going back 18 months. She was evaluated twice, at her own request, specifically to preempt this kind of challenge. I have copies. Her mental state at the time of drafting and signing was never in question and will not be successfully argued otherwise." Derek's smile did not disappear all at once. It left in pieces, like ice breaking up in spring. I said, "I understand you're disappointed. I'm not going to change my mind. I'm going to ask you not to contact me again about this, and I'm going to ask you to direct any further concerns to Mr. Holt." I picked up my coffee. I took a sip. He said, "You're making a mistake." I said, "I'll take that risk." I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel, and I did not cry until I was inside my apartment with the door locked behind me, because grief and relief can live in the same body at the same time, and that day they were both present, fighting for the same space in my chest. I thought it was over. That was my first real mistake. Not Derek's behavior, not the meeting, but my assumption that showing him I was prepared would be enough to make him stop. It was not enough. The messages continued. Not from Derek directly, after our conversation, but routed through my aunt, through distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, through my mother's phone when he couldn't reach me. He found a cousin on my father's side who had no stake in anything, and apparently no better use of their time than to forward me Derek's arguments repackaged as their own concern. He got Cassandra's mother, a woman I had met exactly once, at a holiday party, who had no relationship with my grandmother whatsoever, to call my mother and explain how this was affecting Cassandra emotionally. I documented everything, every text, every call log, every forwarded message. I kept a folder. I had learned from my grandmother's attorney and from my own research that patterns of pressure around an inheritance can become legally relevant, and I was not going to be caught without a record. But documentation doesn't protect you from the thing that actually hurts, which is not the legal threat. It's the slow, grinding work of watching people you grew up with reveal exactly who they are. My aunt, who used to braid my hair at Christmas, Derek, who I had once genuinely liked as a child, before we both grew up and became the people we were going to be. Watching them choose money over everything else, over fairness, over my grandmother's clearly stated wishes, over basic decency, was not something I had a folder for. Priya called me every few days. She never asked about the house. She asked how I was eating, whether I was sleeping, what I was reading. She sent me a book in the mail once. No note, just the book, which was exactly the right thing to do. I kept going to work. I kept teaching. I kept driving past the house on Sundays, standing at the edge of the property with my key in my hand, trying to understand what it meant that this place, this corner lot, this craftsman with the porch swing and the rose bushes along the fence was mine now. Not because I had done anything extraordinary, just because I had shown up. Week after week, year after year, grocery bags and audiobooks and Sunday afternoons just showing up. My grandmother had noticed. That was the whole of it. She had noticed, and she had said so in the only language that could not be argued with. The legal threat arrived in the form of a letter 6 weeks after the will was read. Derek had found an attorney, not a very good one based on the letter, but an attorney nonetheless, who had written 2 pages suggesting that the will should be contested on grounds of undue influence. The argument was that I had spent an unusual amount of time with my grandmother in her final years and may have shaped her decisions to my benefit. I read the letter twice. I set it down. I called Mr. Holt. Mr. Holt said, "We expected this." He said it the way a doctor says. This is a normal part of the process, not to minimize it, but to tell you that you are not alone in this room with it. He said, the undue influence claim is very difficult to make stick when the person making the will was independently evaluated and documented her own reasoning. Your grandmother anticipated this specifically. She left written statements, notarized, explaining her reasoning for each major decision in this will, including the house. I asked him what my grandmother had written about the house. He was quiet for a moment. Then he read it to me. She had written that I was the only member of her family who had treated her like a person rather than a property. She had written that I came not when it was convenient or when there was something to gain, but because I wanted to be there. She had written, "That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything." I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time after that call, not crying exactly, something quieter than crying, something that felt like being handed something heavy and precious and understanding. For the first time, its full weight. The contest went nowhere. This is the part of stories like mine, where people want a dramatic courtroom scene, a moment of confrontation, a villain publicly humiliated. What actually happened was quieter and, in its own way, more complete. Derek's attorney sent the letter. Mr. Skortreen. Holt responded with the cognitive assessments, the notarized statements, the documented evidence of my grandmother's clear and considered intentions. He noted the pattern of contact I had experienced since the will reading and indicated that further pressure tactics could be addressed accordingly. He was very polite. He was also, I could tell even from reading the letter secondhand, someone who had done this before and was not remotely concerned. Derek withdrew the contest 8 days later. I was at school when my phone buzzed with Mr. Holt's message. I was in the middle of reading a story aloud to 22 7-year-olds who were sitting on a carpet in front of me with their chins in their hands. I paused for a moment, just a breath, just a second, and one of my students looked up and asked if I was okay. I said yes. I said I was more than okay. I said, let's find out what happens next. And I kept reading. I moved into the house 2 months later, on a Saturday in January, with Priya and 2 of my closest friends, and a rented truck that was slightly too large for what I actually owned. We spent the afternoon carrying boxes through the front door that had been my grandmother's front door, past the rose bushes that were dormant but still there, into rooms that still smelled faintly like her, like chamomile and cedar and something I couldn't name that was just unmistakably her. I put my books on her shelves. I left her kitchen table exactly where it was. My aunt has not called since the contest was withdrawn. Derek has not contacted me. Cassandra's mother, presumably, has found other people's grief to manage. The extended relay network of concern has gone quiet. I have thought about whether I should feel sad about that, about the distance, about the version of family that this whole episode made permanently impossible. I have thought about it honestly and at length, and what I keep coming back to is this. That version of family was never real. It was conditional. It was performing closeness while waiting for an inheritance. My grandmother knew that. She knew it, and she protected me from having to find out the hard way. And the way she did it was by leaving me something so clearly, so thoroughly, so legally hers to give, that there was nothing they could do about it. She gave me the house. But what she really gave me was the proof, documented, notarized, argued in letters between attorneys, that I had not imagined who she was to me or who I was to her. I took my personal belongings back the same week I moved in. I went with Priya and a police escort, not because I expected trouble from anyone, but because I had learned by then that having a witness is never the wrong choice. We packed everything in 2 hours. I took the mug, the chamomile mug, the one she always held in both hands. I took the quilt from the guest bedroom. I took the photograph from the hallway, the one of her at 26, standing in front of a car she'd bought herself, grinning like the whole world was slightly funny. I know exactly where that photograph is right now. It's on the mantle, in the living room, in the house that is mine. I think about what I would tell someone who is where I was, staring at 7 missed calls, a letter from a cousin's attorney, a table full of people who are using the word fair to mean in my favor. I think about what I wish someone had told me. I would tell them, document everything, from the beginning before you think you need to. I would tell them, find one person who is fully on your side and let them be fully on your side without guilt. I would tell them, the people who show up only when there's something to gain will always be louder than the people who showed up when there was nothing. But loud is not the same as right, and it is not the same as legal. And it is not the same as what your person actually intended when they sat down and decided what to do with what they had built. I would tell them, your presence was not manipulation. Your care was not calculation. Showing up is not undue influence. Love given freely and consistently over years without an audience and without expectation. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. I'm sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table as I write this. The rose bushes are starting to come back. In a few weeks, they'll be full, the way they always were by May, and I'll be able to see them from this window, from this chair, with this mug in my hands. She knew what she was doing. She always did.